Hi and welcome. I am thrilled to be here for another Innovations at Work. And what I'm always doing is trying to bring very interesting people who have new ideas, new suggestions about how we can work differently and do much better in our performance, in our productivity, in our collaboration, communication. But what if we're not even there yet? What if we're actually starting from a platform of just not feeling great, not having a great day, being challenged by so many other things that we're having to deal with these days? Well, I've got the perfect person for us today, and that person is Caroline Webb, who is a Brit, happens to be a Brit just like me. And she, when I met her first, it was 4 years ago, I think, about 4 years ago, and she had just published her new book at the time, which is called How to Have a Good Day. And it is all about the brain science of how to change your approach, how to have a much better day. And since then, it is now in 14 languages and been published in over 60 countries. And we couldn't need this more at a time like this. So I'm absolutely thrilled now to be welcoming Caroline Webb. So without further ado, here is Caroline.
Hi, Sophie. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's we had to be very flexible with all the different things that we're dealing with these days, but I couldn't be more thrilled. So first of all, you have a very interesting background and do not have the kind of background that I would expect somebody who is writing this kind of book to have. And I seem to remember there's, economics in it. There's the Bank of England. Can you start and tell us your journey and how you got to writing this book about this topic?
Well, that's a very nice question. I mean, of course, everybody's always interested in how to have a good day and how to thrive. But my entry into it, I actually originally wanted to be an astrophysicist, I'll be honest.
Really? Oh, my goodness. Wow.
Yeah, I was very into physics, very into maths, or math, as we would say for our American audience. And I was really excited about the stars and the universe and so forth. But what happened was that when I was 16, I took a course in economics. And I was blown away by the idea that you could be rigorous in thinking about human performance, human potential, human behavior. And that was really the point at which I decided this is what I want to focus on. I want to focus on the quirks of the human condition and how humans can thrive in societies. That was where my career first started, because I was doing a lot of economic policy work. The Bank of England isn't a commercial bank. It's actually the UK's central bank. So I was working in public policy. But over time, I got more and more interested in smaller units. So not thinking about regions or whole countries, but starting to notice what happens in a team, what happens with a leader's behavior, what happens in an organization, and how the culture works. And so my interest in being rigorous in thinking about human performance and potential shrank from the massive scale, the macro scale, down to very individual scale. And that's when I went to McKinsey, the management consulting firm, where I wanted to focus on organizational change and leadership. And I honestly thought I'd stay there for a couple of years, but then, I found my thing, I found my path, and really, spent 12 very happy years there working with people as a leadership coach. So working sometimes one-to-one, working with teams, working with huge groups of leaders to help them figure out how to be the best they could be, and also to create cultures where people wanted to work. And that was the focus of my work. So that's what led to the book. I had a lot of data points after 12 years of doing that.
Were you having lots of bad days at McKinsey? I'm only kidding.
Well, the beauty of doing that work consistently for such a long time, for longer than a decade, was that I got to see so many different organizations in so many countries. And I would go in every time and say, tell me what a good day looks like for you. Tell me what a bad day looks like, and what would give you more good days. And it was a very short interview guide when I go in and meet someone for the first time. It was always a fascinating conversation. And I noticed over time that there were really repeating things that came up, and that I was able to go back to my academic background, not just economics, not just behavioral economics, but also neuroscience and psychology, and that there were really predictable things that we could take from the literature that would make a difference, and that were making a difference when I was making that jump from the research to application. And then eventually some of my clients said, you should write a book. Or, could you write a book? Could you write this down, please?
Right. So then how does the neuroscience work? How, obviously we want to give some very practical tips, in a bit, but how does it actually work brain-wise? I'm always fascinated, it's kind of like the person who needs to sort of understand everything from the ground up.
Well, the good news is that for those of us who are trying to figure out how to live from day to day, we don't need an enormous amount of technical information. The science is changing every single day. What we can say for sure are a few really crucial things. First of all, that the conscious part of our brain has some limitations. It generally can only do one thing at a time. It can only process a certain amount of information. It gets tired very easily. If we can work with that rather than against it, then we can allow our conscious mind, the bit that's responsible for reasoning, for self-control, for planning, to do its best work. And so often we just power through and we don't give it the conditions that will allow it to flourish. And then there is a part of our brain, which is, of course, massively powerful, driving most of what we do, which is our subconscious, our automatic system. And, that's doing a lot of things. It's keeping us breathing. It's keeping us alive. But it also has a lot of shortcuts that it takes to try and lighten the load on the conscious part of our brain. And some of them are involved in responding to what are perceived as threats, a defensive response to threats. And, in the real world, that's not someone coming to punch you most of the time. It is things that are a little bit more existential. It's things to do with your self-worth and your social standing. It's anything that undermines your feeling of competence and control, for example, your feeling of being treated fairly or being connected and included with your gang. And anything that triggers a sense of threat on those dimensions will trigger a defensive response in our brain. It'll dampen activity in the parts of our brain that are more sophisticated. We'll get that fight, flight, freeze response. And having a good day is so much about tuning into what's your pattern, what are your particular hot buttons, knowing what could be a good repertoire for you to recenter in the heat of the moment and get back to a state where you're not feeling as much focused on the threats in the situation, but more focused on the potential rewards in the situation.
So it starts with more us needing to have more awareness about ourselves and the different elements, the different moments that cause us, or the different triggers, as you say, that cause us to be able to identify those moments. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Yeah, I think self-awareness is where all of this starts, is, getting to know yourself and not beating yourself up too much, because, we all, by definition, our defensive responses can, take us out of our more centered state, and we're not at our best at that point. There is actually less activity in the prefrontal cortex when people do feel even mildly stressed by something that they can't control. And so it's normal not to be at our best under, uncomfortable pressure. There's some degree of pressure and stress, which is exciting. But then, when it gets to a point where it feels like it's beyond our control, then most of us will notice that we start to become a bit snappy. Become avoidant, or, we become a bit more black and white in our thinking. And that's normal. And then you need a repertoire for noticing, pausing, and then resetting.
And how, in times like these, where it's not just, okay, I get particularly stressed when I'm just about to travel overseas. You have so much to do.
Travel overseas, my gosh.
Exactly. But what about now, when there are so many different stresses and strains and just the challenge of so much uncertainty that's really causing us to have many different challenges coming at us from different sides. How can we, approach that and not be overwhelmed, I guess?
You're so right. I mean, absolutely. In the last few months in particular, for many people, for a longer period, there's so much that comes at us every single day. How can we possibly stay out of this defensive mode? How can we possibly stay centered when you look at all of the uncertainty and all of the stresses that we face? I am not saying you can stay out of this defensive mode, but I am saying that quite small things will help you stay more centered. And that's what I specialize in, is trying to find the smallest possible thing that will make things feel a bit better. I'm not one of these people who says, just imagine and everything will be awesome. That doesn't sound right in a British accent anyway.
Right. Yeah.
I'm more about, well, okay, if you know that actually studies have shown that getting some distance from a situation seems to tell your brain that you're reducing the state of threat, because you're getting away from the threat. And by distance, I mean, how will I think about this in a year's time? So it could be time, or putting yourself in the arms of your better angels and saying, okay, well, what would my best self say about this right now? Or imagining an incredibly wise person, I might say, what would Sophie say about this?
Right.
Anything which takes you out of the heat of the moment has been shown to actually reduce the state of alert and to help us then be able to think more clearly again. And there are tons of things like this that only take a few seconds that have been shown to make a big difference.
I love that phrase, in the arms of your better angels. That's such a beautiful image that someone says, I really need that. Like, where are they? Where are those better angels that I need around me right now? I'd love a couple of practical examples in terms of how you sort of help people at a particular moment, and what somebody will do when they're sort of facing that, when the angels aren't around or they can't find them, or how to change that mood, how to make that incremental change that just, I guess, reframes. It's sort of reframing of your brain, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, as I said, there are some things that in the heat of the moment can reduce your sense of threat. So that really helps. We know that, I've just mentioned distancing. We know that labeling, what psychologists call labeling, is in itself helpful. So self-awareness in itself is helpful. If you can say to yourself, Caroline seems to be a bit stressed right now. I see. And she's stressed because. And just the sheer fact of acknowledging the signal, acknowledging the alarm ringing in your brain, has also been shown to start to reduce the sense of alert and alarm. It's like you've heard the alarm and you've hit the snooze button, at least, even if you haven't turned it off. And then that we know that there's a really remarkable sense of two-way flow between our brain and our body. So we know that when we are relaxed, we tend to breathe quite deeply and slowly. And we know that if we breathe deeply and slowly, it seems to send a signal back up the nervous system to suggest to our brain, well, you can't be stressed because you seem to be breathing deeply. So that's why all of those studies out there have been shown in very many different traditions and many different styles to have a nice positive impact on our ability to think clearly. So just even taking a couple of belly breaths can be enough to drop your cortisol levels. But then there's another side of all of this, which is to say, okay, that's dampening the threat. You mentioned reframing. There is a very sophisticated technique which is called reappraisal or reframing, which is where you look at the facts in a situation and you try to strip away any of your kind of dramatic interpretations. So you don't say, he completely ignored me. You say, okay, what I know for sure is that he did not reply to an email that I sent last Tuesday. Okay. Then you say, what am I assuming? I'm assuming that he saw it and very consciously decided to ignore it. What's an alternative assumption? An alternative assumption could be, maybe I didn't send the email.
Oh,
maybe it's still in drafts. Maybe I sent it, but it came at a really bad time. Maybe it could be any number. Or maybe he wanted to give it a real thoughtful response, but then did what so many of us do when we need to write a thoughtful email. We say, I'll do it later. Once you then start to think of alternative explanations, you can chill out. And then you can say, okay, could be any one of these things. Now what do I do?
Right. So then having alternative versions of the universe, the dramatic universe that you created, and that enables you to think more clearly and just bring the stress down.
Yeah. You create an alternative story that's not as threatening, then you can think more clearly. I mean, you might be right. Maybe he has ignored your email.
It might be worse.
But you're going to think more clearly about what to do next once you've taken yourself off the defensive. So, that's in itself helpful, whether or not the story is true or not.
And in this, so now that we're working, remotely, it's harder to be able to connect well. I'm always talking about empathy, me, and so it's really trying to read, like, in that tiny little square, what's really happening with her, how's she doing, and tuning in, trying to listen to all those cues. And how, when are there things that you can do to help the other person as well, because the dynamics in this, decentralized, everybody's in, sort of in some kind of isolation. So it seems to me that, and we're all feeling raw and challenged, that the need to be able to do this kind of rethinking, rethinking the situation, reframing it, is happening over and over and over every day.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, to some extent, that's happening all the time anyway. Everybody's facing stresses, in normal times. But I absolutely agree. And I think whatever we can do to express compassion and appreciation for people that we're working with, it's going to help, because going back to those things that we think of as potentially threatening, if we feel that our self-worth or social standing is undermined, that'll be a threat. But anything we can do to boost someone's sense of self-worth and social standing will help to bolster their ability to stay out of defensive mode and to stay centered, even facing into threats. And so I do think that there's room for a lot more appreciation in the working world. I feel that a lot of people understand that it feels amazing when someone says something appreciative about you. And yet, if you look at how much people think they're praising others or appreciating others, it's usually less than they think. And so I think there's a lot of space for that, and just finding, even if you can't say that you love what someone's done in terms of their work output, you can appreciate the efforts or the style or the process. And I think, that combined with some compassion in knowing that if you encounter bad behavior, the chances are it's something that has undermined their feelings of self-worth or social standing, Right. And it's probably not a psychopath.
One would hope.
Yeah.
And so focusing in on elements that you can respond to in a positive way, at least to then sort of try and change that dynamic so that people can connect. Because I think that's one of the critical things, like being able to connect, to have a more positive interaction.
Yeah. And it's, small things like just saying, I really, for example, we had some technical difficulties before we came on, as so often happens. I really appreciate that you stuck with it. You were sort of centered and calm and suggesting all sorts of things to try, but, maybe I wouldn't have stopped to say that appreciative thing to you. And now I'm saying it, and I'm glad I have.
Thank you.
I'm probably glad to hear it. But so often we think it's obvious and we don't actually stop to call it out. And I think there's a lot of room for building social capital between us as humans, and also just building our resilience as humans to show more appreciation and to be very specific about the appreciation.
Well, thank you for the segue and also the appreciation. But resilience. So I know that you do a lot of work on resilience, and I also will want to actually just fold in the fact that you were doing a lot of amazing work when the COVID pandemic started. And the organization is called
Frontline Help.
Frontline Help. And so just so that everybody knows, Caroline was doing some coaching of frontline workers to help them be more resilient, I assume, and be able to deal with, or trying to turn some very bad days into slightly better days. So, in talking about resilience, can you please mention and sort of what you were doing.
That's very nice of you to give me a platform to mention that. Yeah, I mean, so what happened was that, my day job is coaching, is helping professionals be at their best, come what may. And I do quite a bit of pro bono and low bono coaching, as they call it, discounted coaching for people in the social sector. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if I could find a way to give free coaching time to people on the front line of the pandemic? And I thought, I bet loads of coaches would be up for doing this. And they were. It turns out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of coaches wanted to give time. A wonderful platform called Wiser, led by Catherine Rose, stepped up and said, you can use our platform to connect coaches with people, with doctors and nurses and hospital workers who need that help. And so that's where it grew from. And it's going well. And we've actually just decided to extend our services to teachers, because teachers are going to be very much on the front lines. Well, they already have been, and they're going to continue to be. So we are also extending the offer at frontlinehelp.org to teachers. We are expanding the website to cover teachers as well as medical workers and frontline first responders. So that's it. So yes, I mean, you're very nice to give me a chance to mention that. There's been definitely, there's been an amazing team that has come together around this in the last few months. So obviously thinking about the fact that we know we have lots of tricks and tips. We know how to help people with resilience. Right. Who needs it most right now? Well, there are a few clear groups that need that help. So,
and it's also that now I think people are going through a different sense of what we're looking at, the length of time that we're going to be dealing with these challenges and with this uncertainty. And that's really causing people to need to be that much more resilient about as they look towards the future, because this is going to take a while. And people, I think, they got through the lockdown, they survived that, then things were starting to look better. And now that sort of tail is really dragged out, and so a different type of resilience, rather than sort of deal with that shock. Now it's really a different, longer. I need to survive this for longer, and how am I going to do that? How would you suggest the best approach be?
I think you're spot on. The truth is that that research is clear that we cope better with unpleasant things if we have at least some certainty in what we're dealing with. If your train is late, it's you feel really incredibly annoyed if you have no information. If you know that it's going to be a quarter of an hour late, then you feel better about it. You can at least manage that. But uncertainty plus unpleasantness leads to a more intense reaction than just unpleasantness on its own. So yes, I think now we have to understand that. I think a lot of people were thinking, oh well, we'll be in this for a month or two and then we'll get back to normal. And I think it's clear that it's not clear what the new normal is going to be. It's not clear what the next normal is going to be. And so we have to think about, well, if this is how things are, then how do I start to build my life around me? What are the norms and the habits that I'm going to build right now that will help me be at my best if this is how things are for a year or 2 years, or if some of these things stick around forever, what is there that I can do? So I do think that there is a lot more understanding of, for example, the importance of taking breaks. That I mentioned earlier on that our conscious brain gets very tired, but then many of us went straight into back-to-back Zooms. Whether you're a parent trying to deal with the schools, or whether you're a professional trying to do your job, or whether you're trying to deal with family and help family from a distance, Zoom, one after the other. And many of us who were good at taking breaks suddenly forgot how to take breaks. And so that often happens when the context changes. A habit that you thought you had nailed, you have to relearn. And I'm definitely seeing that, and also obviously working on that myself and having to say, okay, well, what's going to work in this context? And being a little kind to myself that it's going to take a little time to get those new habits in place.
And it's I guess it's taking that awareness of what I was doing right before. Because I think one of the challenges that I find is, or one of the good things that we have been learning in the lockdowns is more about how we work best when we, some of the triggers that we sort of need to now identify what those are as we go into this longer. So it's not just, we're just dealing with that. We now actually have to use that information to be able to create a better, not just to have a good day, but have a good week and a good month and a good 6 months.
Exactly.
And taking that awareness, how can people best identify what those triggers are, looking back on what they've been experiencing?
When you say triggers, do you mean say a little bit more?
Habits or things that were help them work better, or just identify when their flow was. Some of those things that they need to adapt in order to be able to have better times and have better days to sort of set themselves up for not getting depressed and challenged and overwhelmed all the time.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, there's a little checklist that I have in my mind of 7 things that I know give us a boost, that the brain treats as a reward. And I'm doing a lot of thinking, both for myself and with others, on how in this environment can we bring those 7 things into our working lives. And they are gratitude. So what can you be grateful for, even in the midst of all of this? Knowing that it doesn't just give you a quick boost, but it also actually starts to shift what you tend to notice, because whatever's top of mind tends to drive then what you notice next and what you notice next. And so when you're reading a lot of bad news, that can mean that you notice everything that's bad. So there's a little bit of turning the dial on that right now that's especially important, given all the challenging news that's around us. There's generosity. And I must admit, that when I was thinking about launching that charitable effort, Frontline Help, I was conscious that I would feel better if I thought about a way to give back, to do something useful. So, I think the more that we can just be aware that even when we're feeling really worn down, doing a little kind thing for someone else has been shown to give us an enormous boost. Achievement is another, it's almost like, absolutely straightforward reward for the brain. Picking really small goals and being kind to yourself, and not picking the massive goal that you fail at and then you feel terrible, but really setting very small goals, especially with new habits. Curiosity, what can I learn from this? That's been shown to be really reliable in boosting your resilience in the face of things that are not so much fun. Purpose, so sense of why am I doing this? Why does this matter? And staying connected to that's been shown to boost people's resilience. Connection, well, that's quite hard, because connection is something that has been really reliable in giving us a boost in the past. So how do we do it now? And I think that the people I'm seeing do it well are saying, okay, well, in this format, I have to try and think about what I liked about serendipitous interactions and think about, well, how do I create that? So, for example, I was running a workshop yesterday, online, of course, and at the end, just putting people into random pairs, as if they were wandering around the room, and just putting them into random pairs so that they ended up doing a debrief with someone that, they'd never met before, and having that serendipity and the pleasure of that randomness, and trying to think about creative ways like that. And then humor. Let's talk about, the last thing being sort of a sense of humor and finding some lightness and silliness and not being shy about weaving that into your day.
Well, I think as 2 Brits, I think we're pretty much there, right?
Yeah, I know, but the question is, does anyone else recognize what we think is funny as funny?
Yeah, I think silly is something that I find incredibly important to have in every day. But you're right, it's not necessarily everybody that thinks the same way I do. That's for sure about that. But yes, humor and smiling, right? I mean, I was just reading something about if you smile when you're talking on the phone, it actually makes a difference to how your voice sounds.
It brightens your tone. And actually, it's a nice tip before you pick up the phone to someone that you're not looking forward to, where the call is likely to be a bit stressful.
Okay.
Smile before. You actually, and then that will carry you into the call with a little bit more energy and pizzazz.
So what have you What do you actually use? I mean, I'm curious, what do you find the key ones that you use? Like some of them I'm sure ingrained, and it's just like, that's easy. Like, don't look at the news. That's another bad article. I don't want to see that. What are the key things that you have to keep reminding yourself because it's just something that's a habit that's hard to break, or you're just drawn to doing something in a particular way?
There are at different times in my life, I've been, better or worse at all of these things. I mean, I think it's a life's journey, right. But I think definitely uncertainty I find particularly challenging. But then I say that, and I'm sure everybody, feels the same, but I like to feel in control. And I would say my family might say that I'm a little bit of a control freak, in fact, a little over-organized. And so I'm trying to learn.
Well, I have to say, looking at your, I actually did have to organize these things on the shelves here because they were all like, this is not my room, but your shelves are looking pretty neat, I will say.
Well, I do a lot of teaching and coaching online. So eventually I thought, so I had a lot of the messy stuff here, and I thought, okay, I need to move the mess over there. And then
oh, I see. So out of camera, it's completely.
I don't want you to think that. No. I don't mean that I have everything neatly organized, but right. I do like to feel like I've got my arms around a situation. And I know the research on this. I know that if you outline, well, what is it I know for sure? What is it that I can control? Okay. Then it does help you stay calmer and face into uncertainty more effectively, because it's easy to think, I don't know anything what's going on.
Right.
Let me just try to focus on what I can control and what I do know. So that's what I'm working with and working on. And, right. I think letting go of any idea I had that I could control everything, certainly not everything. Right. That is my learning edge, as they say. That is what I'm working on a lot at the moment.
And what are you finding in the workshops that you're doing right now, and the challenges that a lot of people are facing in England or around the world? And if there might even be something different in different countries, because different countries are handling the COVID, the economies of different countries are at different levels. COVID, the restrictions are easing or being replaced in different places. What are some of the key things that you're finding which are challenging people most? Because partly it's good to know that we're all in this together, right? And sort of suffering.
Yeah. Well, so I'd make a general point first. I do a lot of work with groups that are spread around the world. Last week, I was working with a company that's largely Japanese, but it's got operations in other countries. And one of the things that I would say is you've got to make sure you're not making assumptions and projecting how things are going in your little neck of the woods on everybody else, because even in the same country, there can be radical differences. So back to your favorite topic of empathy, there is something about just pausing before you project and saying, okay, well, where is this person coming from? And really asking and listening, what you're hearing. But I think in general, people are really tired. The topic that's coming up a lot is burnout and tiredness and exhaustion and that sense of, oh my goodness, this is for real and this is going to continue. And right, I see. Okay, now I have to build new habits. And some of that is practical stuff like, okay, well, I guess this is going to be where I'm working now. Or for people who are having to go into a physical place of work, well, I guess this is now, okay, so how do I keep myself safe? How do I, for people who have kids, how do I think about this long term? So I think there's this shift, as you were saying earlier on, from this is a short-term crisis to, oh, no, it isn't. Okay. And I'm definitely seeing that tiredness mixed with, oh my goodness, at the moment. There's a lot of energy that, is needing to be topped up, I think, at this point for a lot of people.
And what I see is that COVID-19 has accelerated the future of work. It's accelerated the digitization. It's accelerated the need for us to be responsive and work closely together and use more empathy. And there is more empathetic leadership. Command and control is being moved out of and being replaced by a much more relationship-based, trust-based ways of managing people, that we have been needing pre-COVID as well. So I do feel that there are some very positive underneath all of this. There are some
I agree. I hope you're right that but I am hopeful. I do think that we've got much more appreciation of the whole person.
Yes.
You know, appreciating the messiness of people's lives, a little bit more appreciation of what people are juggling.
Right.
We've got more appreciation of people who are playing roles that are, you know, might not be particularly visible, and the crucial role that they play in making everything else possible. I think we've got more understanding of the things we can do without. I agree. There are some good things. It's very hard to say that when you're facing, you know, when you're talking to someone who's lost a loved one. You know, there's so much trauma, and so much trauma of, you know, people still going through the disease. But I think you're right that there could be some positive, lasting effects if we choose to hold on to them. Yes,
and also in terms of how we're thinking and understanding about how we work. And so this is why it's so interesting to me in terms of how you put that positive, how you help people create that positive framework to look at the things that they do well, that they do best, and to lean into that, and therefore be creating a new normal, because I really do see it's so important for us each to be contributing to crafting that new normal, because so much is being disrupted. So, you know, that's where the way you look at this and the way you're sort of framing it, and there's the big picture aspect, and also I wanted to go to the smaller things, because obviously I could have a very difficult boss or a challenging person on my team. So there are also, you know, much more detailed things that are affecting me every single day. And what are the things that you do or advise about those things? Because that can really have a huge impact on everything that I'm doing to change everything, to make my whole, you know, week and just sort of MO improve.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, look, I mean, we've touched on some of it already. We've talked about compassion and empathy, and saying, okay, well, what could be pushing this person buttons? What might be undermining their feelings of self-worth and social standing? What can I say that would be appreciative and that might give them a boost, that might, you know, show that I value who they are? So that is all good foundational stuff. I think there's a lot about how we show up in those conversations as well. There's something which you might have heard of called confirmation bias, and there are a series of biases in the way that we process information consciously. It turns out that our brain can only process a certain amount of what's around us at any given time. We only get to actually see and hear a proportion of what's actually around us. We don't know that because by definition, we're filtering out a lot of stuff. We're just aware of what we actually are consciously able to notice and perceive. And if we come into a conversation where we're expecting someone to be really difficult, then research is really clear that the way that our brain works is we'll look out for information that confirms our ingoing perspective, and we'll potentially filter out anything that contradicts our expectations. And that's a bit of a shame, because you might be coming into a conversation that was a bit, you know, with someone who was a bit difficult last time you spoke to them. You come in, you've got negative expectations. Confirmation bias means you see everything that suggests you were right. Yes, they are a difficult so-and-so. And then you get into a spiral. And so there's a lot that we can do ourselves to say, okay, I know this person was difficult last time. To take that 30 seconds before the call to say, all right, but what do I really want to look out for?
Okay.
What is my real goal here? Like, what do I really want for this relationship? And the simple fact of asking yourself those questions will reset your perceptual filters, which I know sounds a bit woo-woo. It's the way that our brains process information. We look for information that matches what's already top of mind for us. So if we've said, I want to look out for signs of collaboration, you're much more likely to see them and not miss them by mistake.
So this is what's really interesting to me as I think about it. There's self-awareness and self-manipulation.
Manipulation.
Right? I mean,
self-management.
Self-management. Yes, exactly. That's the way to do it. Okay, fine. And it seems that should be easy. Now, obviously, it's not. because we have to become aware. We have to also take that moment, as you're saying, before you have the phone call, before you get on the Zoom, to also be opening up our minds to the fact that it actually might be different than how we perceive.
Right.
So
yes.
there's work to be done in order to change it, and then all the positive things sort of compound.
You're right. And, I know I'm saying it only takes 30 seconds, but of course, it takes some self-discipline. It takes some, and it takes perhaps just looking back at a few situations where you think, well, if I'm likely to notice things that match what's on my mind, even my attitude, my mood as I go into a situation, can I think of times when, or days when I kind of got out of bed on the wrong side and everything was then extremely annoying? If you just have to think of a few times like that, or a few conversations where perhaps you had a completely different perception of what was said to, your colleague who was in the same conversation, and you think, well, you're an intelligent person, how can you have heard something different? If you start to tune into these things, you start to notice that your perceptions might not be completely objective, that there could be a different way of seeing things. And it gets easier the more you do it. And the more you do it, then the more you find that actually there are some lovely benefits that come from being a little bit more open-minded, because you can say, instead of, well, that's not what I said, or that's not right, or that's wrong, you can say, that's interesting. Tell me why you say that. And then you might find out something really interesting.
Yes.
Having
those different reactions and having the opening up the possibility to allow someone to answer differently. I love that. Yes, that's great.
Yes. It's very good for personal and family relationships, not just for professional relationships too.
Really? Okay. Very good point.
So I think I said that, but maybe he didn't hear that. Oh,
right. And the context, of course, is so important. And those trigger words. Caroline, I know that you'd said 30 minutes, and I'm so glad that you've given me a little bit more, and given everybody else. And thank you so much for sharing everything you have, because it couldn't be more important at a time like this to try and help people reset things, reframe things, look at things in a different way, and find the silver lining for today, this minute, or next week, and the months ahead. So thank you so much. This is Caroline Webb. Get her book in whatever language, there are 14 languages, lots of countries, How to Have a Good Day. Thank you so much, Caroline, for being here.
Thank you, Sophie. Great questions.